Hey, it's time for another edition of Singles Only Podcast. Paul Farahvar here, your host. This week features the return of Joe Kwaczala. I replayed his episode 131 last week. For those of you who didn't listen to it or if you're new to the podcast, it's from 2019. It's one of my favorite episodes. We re-aired it so people have context to see what has happened since he did the show in 2019. Is he married? Is he still single? You have to listen to find out. I'll be at Zanies in Old Town April 4th, Tuesday. Hopefully by the time this airs, the show is sold out. If not, please get your tickets. This is a big show. I'm going to be running my new hour, I believe, before I record it this summer. Then I'll be in Atlanta at the Laughing Skull and at Comedy Zone in Fort Walton, I believe it is. I don't even know where that is. Columbus, Atlanta as well. Fort Walton, Florida. Those sound right? Oklahoma City, Bricktown Comedy Club, April 20th, 21st with Dave Landau. Then I'll be in JP's Comedy Club for the first week of May in Arizona. Then I'll be in LA and also in Florida. Go to my website, Paul F. Comedy, for upcoming dates, times, etc. I'll be in Chicago here and there as well in April too, or Chicago areas, Chicago adjacent, I suppose. Yeah, follow me on Instagram if you haven't already. I'm trying to get my numbers up, and check out our sponsor. Thank you for listening. Hey, it's time for another edition of Singles Only Podcast. Paul Farahvar here, your host. If you're listening to this episode, you can actually watch it as well on my YouTube page. It's YouTube.com/Paul F. Comedy. This is a special best of series again. I often say that this episode 131, is my favorite episode. Whenever people ask me, what should I start with when I talk about, when I promote the podcast or they hear about the podcast, I always mention this guest in this episode because it was literally what I imagined the podcast to be when I started it. Comedian Joe Kwaczala. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Paul. How's it going?
I'm good. I'm glad to have you back. Joe, your episode is definitely one of the most listened to episodes.
Is that right? That's crazy.
It is because and people quote it to me a lot. I can tell when people listen to it because they say bread pudding. You told one of the best stories. Have you? It's a story about a date that just clearly people always
out
say,
of control.
Yeah, people always say they have like crazy dates, and we all do, I guess, but yours was probably like the most insane.
Yeah, I mean, that's I guess that's saying something, and it was certainly unusual for me. It was me trying to kind of get out of my comfort zone, having been in both before and since like a very safe person who does not wade in those waters at all, but like it was at a point in my life, and maybe just like whatever was going on, I don't even really remember, but I just think I was like, let's see where this goes, which is really against all instincts that I ever have, and it really wrong place, wrong time to to be that way.
For those of you who haven't listened to it, go back and listen to episode 131. You mentioned that on the podcast where you just wanted to get out of your comfort zone. You're just like, you know what I'm just going to go along with anything. Yeah. And really, your date was something that you could never imagine happening. The things that she was saying were so funny, and it should be a movie, if not a sketch or something.
Right? Yeah. It feels like, and I've watched some movies recently that have kind of the theme of like one bad night. Like Eyes Wide Shut is kind of like that, and the movie After Hours is kind of like that. And I that as a premise for a movie, I think it's always fun. It's like, oh, I did kind of have a version of that I suppose is like right along that line where you could change enough details to make it like a horror movie, and you could change enough details to make it a comedy movie if you just go in the other direction.
There was a movie, I think, in the 80s with Bruce Willis called Blind Date, I think.
Okay.
I don't remember the details. I think Kim Basinger or someone was in it, but it was just like also like a horrible date. But obviously the stuff that happened to that show, from what I remember, wouldn't hold up today. But yours would. Have you
Hey,
told that story on any other? Have you mentioned that on?
no, not really. I mean, I think I did a show, I think a few years ago, where the premise was like, do you ever do We Still Like You? Do you remember that show?
Yeah, I do remember that show, and I have done it. Yeah,
Yeah. I think I told it then, just like that's a story where it's like embarrassing, and like the whole
yeah.
point is that like the audience will support you no matter what you say. So I told it, some version of it there, but I've never before. I mean, it was like kind of scarring in a little way. So like
I'm sure it
with
is. Yeah,
maybe it'll take some distance for me to go back to it, and yeah, I don't know, because then there's also the. I mean, I know I told it on your show, but it's like a little bit. I'm like, I don't want this to like get back to this woman and then suddenly she can find me and is back in my life. I think that's very rare, that wouldn't happen, but still there's a part of me that's like, I don't want to like chance it and then suddenly
sure.
this person is like bothering me.
Well, that was my next question was, did you ever hear back from her? I mean, because when we did ours, I think it was 2018 or so. And then there was COVID. So I was like, you've never heard back from her or anything like that?
I mean, yeah, I hear back is an interesting turn of phrase, because it's as though you hear back from someone that you reach out to. I'm hoping to never hear from this person ever. Just I'm hoping, and I think this is very likely, that I was one in a string of hundreds of guys for her, and that I was not memorable enough. Like, she's like the most memorable person I've ever met in my life, and I'm like not even registering in like the top 100 is my hope, and I think a likely possibility.
The the quote that I often get, and I often use it just when I'm walking into someone's house, is where she was in your house or you were somewhere and she's like, "Can I have this?" Like she's just asking for everything in you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
You're like,
which
no.
makes me wonder, and I maybe brought this up last time. Like, was she homeless? Like, what was going on? Why did she need, or why did she want so many different household items?
And the bread pudding. Yeah, bad news.
Yeah,
There's no bread pudding. Such a
yeah.
I strongly urge anyone that's listening to this go back to episode. In fact, I think what we'll do is we'll probably release that one again, and so
Uh-huh.
people have it, and then we'll know what's going on here. So fast forward, that was 2019. I apologize. What
Okay.
has happened since? Are you still single? You are not single anymore?
No, I'm not. Since then, like towards the tail end of 2019, I met somebody, and 6 months in, which is candidly the longest I've ever been with somebody. 6 months in my opinion, again, not someone who's super experienced, but I think is about right. That's when like you can start to get kind of serious. Like, you've made it 6 months, like you clearly like this person, you guys are connecting. And then 6 months happened to be when lockdown happened. So already there was like this natural moment of like getting serious, but then also the circumstances of life led us to spending a ton of time with each other, being at each other's apartments and kind of not seeing anybody else for a prolonged period of time. And so I feel like it lined up in a way where it made sense, and if it had been a little bit earlier, it would have been maybe a little strange to do that, like if you've been seeing someone for 2 months and then like suddenly you're like basically living with each other, but 6 months felt about right. Um, and she and I, it was a little bit of like an acceleration period too, because it was like
Well,
yeah,
no, I was going to say the date in you were locked down in LA, right?
yes.
So LA, that a period of time, a year in lockdown is, I would equivocate it. Is that the right word? I don't know.
You would
Equivocate it to 3 years.
liken it.
Yeah, liken it. I would liken it to 3 to 5 years in a relationship because It does. It expedites everything. You're in a situation where you're with the person 24 hours a day. Were you guys staying together or kind of?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that if you survive that, you probably are going to be in a good situation for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and then about a year after lockdown and about a year and a half of our relationship, she moved in.
Hell yeah.
And that was 2 years ago. And yeah, it's been great. And I'm so lucky and fortunate and happy. And we've got a good thing going. And it's a far cry from last time I talked to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that the podcast steered you in the right direction. It feels
Yeah.
I feel like
I credit the podcast. Absolutely.
That's what I was going for. And that's kind of why you're here. We just wanted a ringing endorsement. Have you, is she a comedian also, or?
No, she's an actor.
Okay, good. See, like I think that's the way to go. I think, especially in LA, you have a good position because someone that's not in comedy, but also understands the hustle and what's involved.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, she's adjacent, so she understands more than say someone who's completely outside of the world, but she's not not in the direct community. And I as a comedian am also a writer and actor, and she and I help each other with, like, during the pandemic, self-tapes became the norm for auditions.
Right.
So, we can really help each other, and we are not struggling. We're not, it's not annoying. Like, we both get it so that we can be there for each other, because it sucks to, like, have to put yourself on tape. You need another person to read those other lines.
Totally.
And asking that of someone where it's like completely out of their depth sucks. But, like, we both know the grind, we know the deal, and so we can kind of work on those things together and be there for each other in a way that's helpful.
Well, for those, obviously people know self-tape is where you have to record at home, and
Mm-hmm.
you just did one for sport clips, no big deal. And
Ooh.
but the thing that's funny about that is, do you have to take her when she's doing them off, when she's reading her lines to you, do you have to be like, okay, take it down a notch? Like, is she like, do you ever have that? You're like, okay, come on, this is about me right now.
Oh, right. Where I feel personally slighted by her inhabiting a character who's not
She's asking
thrilled
you
with
about the feeding lines, and she's like, well, I kind of read this as this, and you're like, just read the line. Do you ever have that?
No, none of that has ever happened. She's a pro, so I'm not, but
yeah. And so what have you, I guess, what's the advice you have for, how did you guys meet? Let's start with that.
Through a friend, when it was more specifically a good friend of mine, his girlfriend, who I had become a friend of mine at that point. She grew up with my girlfriend, so, like, they've known each other for a long time, and she brought her to a show that I was doing with her boyfriend. So he had a show, he had me on it, and then she came to the show and then brought
Fellow comedian.
yeah. And so, yeah, it was a kind of classic friend of a friend thing. And, we met each other afterwards. So she had already seen me do pretty well at a comedy show, which I've heard comics talk about before, but that's never been my experience. I've never, like, done well at a comedy show and then, like, schmoozed up. Yeah, no, I've never done that. And I don't really think that this situation was like that as well. It just happened to be that the first time she did see me was on stage.
Well, it wasn't planned. It wasn't a situation where they were like, oh, we're bringing someone to set you up, or was it?
No, absolutely not.
Randomly she came to watch the
Mhm.
show, and then
Mhm.
I hit it off.
Yeah.
What would have happened, do you think, if you didn't have a good show?
She's very nice. So I don't know. I mean, she's a very, very nice and forgiving person. So
Okay.
I
Also,
think
you're, even if she didn't enjoy the show, what if your headspace as a comedian after a show, you're not in You're not at a place to like
where I
talk.
want to hang out. Yeah, at all. Yeah, that's true. I might have just been like, I'm booking it. I can't
Right.
be around people, especially ones that just witnessed me show my whole ass.
Have you is your friend and his girlfriend still together? Just
Hmm.
okay, because that would be
Yeah,
awesome.
they are.
They didn't survive and you guys did.
I mean, sometimes that kind of stuff happens, but no, they're going strong, and we see them frequently. So
And does your girlfriend come to the shows with you now when she's available, or do you kind of prefer not to be
you
there?
know in the early days, and you would understand this. I was very nervous about even though she'd seen me, I was still nervous about her seeing me again because I didn't want her to go to a bad show, and I didn't want her to see me have a bad set, and I didn't want to because I've had. And I'll tell you a quick story. Um, I was I was dating a woman in Chicago, and very early on, I invited her to a show, and she was really excited to see it. And then I did my set, and it was fine. Like I really, in my recollection, and at the time, I was like, yeah, it was fine. It was fun, funny. And we went to the bar after the show, and she kept being like, "Do you think it went well?" And I was like, I
Did
mean,
before, yeah.
yeah. And then the more she asked me, I was like, well, now I don't. And it was just, it was, she gave me the vibe that she did not really enjoy what I did on stage. And then when the bar was closing down and we were leaving, she was like, I really need to go to the bathroom. Do you think maybe the bartender will like let me sneak back in the bar and go to the bathroom? And we are like, yeah, probably. So we asked the bartender and he was like, yeah, sure. So she went in there. I'm just kind of like waiting outside with like a few other comics, and like kind of too much time passes. And I'm thinking like I should maybe like go check on her or something. Like she didn't seem drunk, but maybe it like hit her
Sure.
and then she like passed out, or she's just like in pain. I don't know. So something is going on. So I like kind of rap on the door and talk to the bartender, and I'm like, hey, so that woman just went in here to use the bathroom, but that was like a long time ago. She hasn't come out. Maybe like you could check on her, I could check on her. And he was like, oh, that woman left out the back door like 20 minutes ago.
Oh my God.
And I never saw her again.
Wow.
So that like gave me PTSD about like a person that I'm dating
Right. Sure.
they cannot come to a comedy show.
Sure.
I unless it's extremely curated. Like I know this is like a really hot show. I know there will be a good crowd.
Right.
There's a strong possibility that I will do well, and I will do like the best set I can. And in the early stages of dating my current girlfriend, none of those things really lined up. I had some shows, and she knew I had shows, but I did not invite her because I was like, I can't run the risk of you seeing a bad show. It reflects
And
on
go out
me,
the back door. Yeah.
and then you go out the back door. Yeah. And so she kind of thought that I didn't like her because she knew I wasn't inviting her to those shows. But it was like, there's this, and every comedian I've talked to about that, they're like, oh, like totally. Like that's what
Yeah.
I won't let my girlfriend of 5 years see me do comedy. I just won't. And so as you know, it's a delicate thing, but
Yeah.
all that being said, um, eventually got comfortable enough to she can come see a show, and good, and honestly good enough shows popped up, and like the degree of security where it was like, yes, I'm come along, I would love for you to go. And then after the pandemic, when all of us were really starved for any connection with anybody and to like go see things, she was coming to, excuse me, a good amount of shows. But then after a while she was like, that's enough.
Yeah. Do you take her? So you tour well sometimes too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you take her on those shows with you? Like if you're going,
Yeah. I mean, if it's a place if it's a place she wants to go to, it's like, you know, not long before the pandemic, I had a gig in Vegas. And so from LA, you can drive there. So it's not like we had to buy a new plane ticket or anything. And then also it was like a free trip to Vegas where like, I'm not only am I getting paid, but we're getting put up in a nice hotel and all that stuff. So it was like we did that, and that was great, because sometimes you go to Vegas and like you lose money.
Yeah.
But in this case, we could go, just kind of goof around and be in a nice place, and I'm actually profiting off this trip.
Sure.
And so we've done that, and I did the San Francisco Sketch Fest earlier this year, and she came with me. So I'll be going to New York probably next month or so, and she's coming along, because sometimes these places like San Francisco, New York, Vegas, it's like places you want to go to anyway. So,
But she's not going to Des Moines, Iowa with you?
probably not.
Yeah. I always find it's funny because there's a couple of comedians I tour with every once in a while that are bigger names. And when their significant others aren't with them, it's like stressful for me because I have to like go out with them all the time and we're just drinking and partying and whatever. And I don't really drink anymore, but they want to go out, they want to do all these stuff. And then sometimes like they bring their significant other and they're like, you can just see that they don't want that person around. They want to just hang out with the other comedians. So it's kind of like
Weird.
a weird balance that it's like, when do you decide that you want to have someone? And I've been in that situation too, where I've brought girls I've dated to a show and I'm like, oh man, I kind of just want to hang out and talk to the comedians for a few hours. So it's like, but on the flip side, there's sometimes where you're like, oh, my opener is problematic. I'd rather just leave. And
Yes. Oh my God. It can be perfect, because like, yeah, sometimes you're stuck, you do this gig and it's like in a weird club and like the openers are kind of strange, and yeah, if you got your girlfriend with you, you can just be like, we're gonna go have dinner, and
guys,
they can't be like, oh man. But if you're alone and you're just like, I'm gonna leave, it's like
right.
they
It's
don't
an
quite
awkward position, and I've been in both situations sometimes, and I don't have a serious girlfriend, but even when I've been dating people, I'm like, oh man, like I wish she wasn't here right now, or sometimes I'm like, I wish I had an out because I just want to leave, and this guy wants to keep going. But yeah, it's kind of like, when do you do that? And then going back to what you said about bringing someone to a show, it's dating is harder because they always want to come see you and you're like, well, it's not like a thing where I can socialize with you. I gotta like, prepare and stuff like that. I'll put you in a corner you can watch and the other comedians, and then when I go up, we'll leave after my set. But it's always like, I don't know if they want to come now. I got to do some good jokes. I'm working on new material. Like it starts affecting what you do because they've seen all your stuff, or they haven't seen your stuff.
Yeah, and sometimes they have to, like, often if it's a showcase, they have to endure upwards of an hour and a half of other people of varying quality doing whatever that you did not sanction. And so you're like, okay. I feel that way. I mean, like, even just outside of like relationships, it's like when I would do shows and my like parents were around. My parents are like very supportive of my career, which is great, and they like to go to shows. But like I'm always like, I can't like sign off on like the 6 other weird dudes that you're gonna see, and like you're not gonna like it. And I'm gonna go up maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, and like I'm happy for you to see that. There's no problem, but like know what you're getting into. Like, especially when I was starting out, it was like bar shows with real suspect comics. It's like, but now, luckily now, like I'm at a position where like they can come see me, and I'm doing like an hour or whatever, and like maybe there's an opener, and then it won't be very long. So there's that.
I tuned out of everything you said after you said my parents are supportive, because I was like, oh, what would that be like? No, I'm just kidding.
It's nice.
No, that's the same way too. Like you have these 6 comedians, but the one thing that I've done lately is I sometimes you're like, well, it's a good way to see what maybe I'm missing something about someone. And then I'll be like, who did you like? And then because they're like people that aren't on the inside, we have our opinions. And then it's so amazing to hear when someone who doesn't do what we do. I think your girlfriend's a little different because she's an actor and she knows that she can probably determine what's hack and what's not, I think.
I mean, you'd be surprised. I mean, she definitely has like a good sensibility, and I think she definitely does have a good ear for what is unoriginal and what is. But I think she's also a good, reliable, like objective audience member that I can. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, and that was funny too, because going back to when we started, I don't know, from that open mic at Merkel's years ago, I think over 12 years ago.
Yeah.
We have Persians, and we would have guest what do you call it? Judges. They would judge it was a champ. It was a. Do you remember? It was like a
kind of. I'm sure I stayed away if there were judges.
And they would pick the best 3 comedians, and sometimes we'd have celebrity judges. Some celebrity judges would be either the bookers at Zanies or Comedy Laugh Factory, or just 3 beautiful women. Mm-hmm. And the stuff that they would sometimes, like, I remember I was like, no, like they would say their top 3, and then like when you're like, what? No, we're not putting him in the finals.
Right.
Kind of rude, but we're like, I guess, all right, I guess we have to put so and so in. But yeah, it's interesting to see what people see. And then going back to your situation with the girl who left out the back, like what you did was probably like hilarious to people that go to comedy shows. But I can see how, sometimes people that don't understand comedy are like, wait, why is he alienating half the crowd and then digging himself out of the hole? You know what I mean? The nuances of comedy. Uh-oh. Yep.
I'd lost you for a second. You were saying alienating.
Oh, I said I could see how like that one with the back that went out the back door.
Yes.
It's like, why are you alienating half the crowd and digging yourself a hole to get out of it? And they don't understand that nuance. Whereas people that go to it's like, holy shit, that was amazing.
Yeah, I'll forever be curious about what exactly, because again, it was not a bomb. I know it was not a bomb. I think maybe she like had started to like heighten in her head like the version of what my comedy would be, and it just didn't meet that expectation, is my best guess.
Did she talk about comedy at all? Like, was she like, oh, I really love Larry the Cable Guy?
No, that's, if I had hints like that, I think I could have a better guess for what exactly happened. But no, it just like, and my comedy is not offensive. It's by no means like racy at all. It doesn't like touch on any sensitive issues. So like,
maybe it wasn't racy enough. Maybe she was looking for you to, drop a couple.
She's a real edgelord, and I did not deliver.
She was hoping, she's like, well, I didn't notice anything that was edgy enough for me. So
I'm gonna have to drop this guy ASAP.
That is such a weird situation to be in, and I'm sorry you had to deal with it, but it all worked out.
It did, yeah. It really made me sad. But made me sad, then made me angry, and then you move on.
Sure, and clearly you have. What are the one thing that you would give advice to people that are dating other people that are adjacent, whatever? Because I always say this is the perfect thing. Is it clearly you're not going to say, well, it sucks. Like, what is it that? What was it that makes it? What do you think that makes it work the best in terms of
to date someone who's like kind of adjacent to what you do, but not fully involved in your particular discipline? Okay.
Well, have you dated other comedians before, right? You have or no?
No.
Oh, I thought you did. I apologize.
No, I don't. As far as I know, it's like the handful of people who I've dated. Some have been like somewhat adjacent, but nobody who's like been a full on comedian. And what's nice about it is, you can be there for each other, and you can maybe offer a fresh perspective that isn't fully off base. You know what I mean? Like, anyone can give their perspective on a thing, and a good angle. And I'm just talking about like dealing with the hardships of this business and of this discipline. and hardships, frustrations, whatever. But like anyone can have a good perspective, but when there's someone who like works in a similar thing, sometimes the wisdom that they've got can be particularly insightful, and to open yourself to that, I think it is a wise move.
Sounds like it. We'll see. We'll check back in 2 years to see. Like, yeah, she left. I did this avant-garde show and she just was like out the back door.
Yeah, I did this podcast and she was like, how dare you talk about me?
It's like, why are you on a podcast called Singles Only? I've had that.
Yeah, suspicious, huh?
Yeah. Well, Joe, I really, really, really appreciate you coming back. And like I said, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Your episode is literally the one episode. If anyone asks me, especially when I match on like dating apps, like, what's your pod about? I'm like, go listen to the episode.
Yeah.
And
that's so sweet.
I've learned how to spell your name because sometimes I'll spell it wrong. Like, I can't find it. I'm like, oh, all right. Here, this is what it is.
You had to learn. Well, that's good to hear that one of the worst nights, if not the worst night of my life, turned into something that's nice and productive for somebody.
Silver lining and everything. Yeah, that is. And now you've added another dating story about going out the back door. So we can add to the list. Where can people find out more about your upcoming stuff, and what do you got coming up that you want to promote?
Yeah, people can go to Joe Kwa, JoeKWA on Instagram and TikTok. They can Joe K on Twitter. And of stuff that's coming up, I'm going to be doing shows in the middle of April, like the 12th through the 17th, thereabouts. You can check my stuff. And joekwazala.com. I guess we'll have my dates as well. And yeah, I've got a new special coming out on May 6th, I think. So again, if you look at the socials, you'll see everything you need to know about what I'm doing, where I'm going to be, what's coming out.
Awesome, Joe. I really, really appreciate it. Everyone, please check out Joe again. And like I said, I'll probably put your other episode up right before this, just to give people some feedback. Context. Yeah. Thank you again, Joe. And thank you all for listening to another edition of Singles Only Podcast.
So we've been doing this podcast, 6-7 years now? And the one thing you know about me is that I was a lawyer. It's one of the cardinal things associated with me behind being a comedian, former musician, or failed musician, or Persian, or old. But when I need a lawyer, I call my friend Scott Shapiro, and you should do the same too. 312-648-8800. Scott Shapiro has been representing people for 25 years with workers' comp cases, personal injury, and entertainment law. Scott is a full-service law firm, and in addition to all the injuries that I talked about, work injuries, personal injury, and entertainment law, he handles other matters too. So you can hit him up, 312-648-8800, or check out his website, scottshapirolegal.com, or email him at scott@scottshapirolegal.com. Tell him I sent you. You will not be disappointed.
I'm still